Welcome to our deep dive all about deep work.
Sounds very meta.
It is a bit. We'll be taking a look at Cal Newport's Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World.
It's such a relevant book for our current world.
It really is. So much vying for our attention these days. So much distraction.
Yeah. So maybe let's start off by just defining what deep work actually is for people who aren't familiar with the book.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So deep work, well, Cal Newport defines it as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit.
Okay.
So that's a lot. But basically,
Can you get down a little bit?
it's about focusing without distraction and pushing your brain to its limits. And that's where you can get into like a flow state and produce really high quality work.
Okay. So you're really getting the most out of your brain power.
Yeah, exactly. You're not multitasking.
Yeah.
You're really laser focused on one thing.
Right. Right. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially considering how much we're all pulled in different directions these days.
Yes. We're constantly bombarded with information and notifications and
It's just things to do.
yeah, it's hard to resist those temptations.
It is, which is why this concept of deep work is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you think about, what we're doing the rest of the time. What's the opposite of deep work?
Right. So Newport calls that shallow work.
Oh.
And shallow work is basically those tasks that we do on autopilot, often while we're distracted.
So things like email.
Exactly. Email meetings, social media, all that stuff.
Okay, yeah. A lot of those things that just feel like busy work.
Yeah, exactly. And they're often necessary to some degree, but they don't really contribute to meaningful progress.
Right. It's like you're not really pushing yourself or growing when you're doing those things.
Yeah, and it can be so easy to get caught up in that shallow work and mistake busyness for productivity.
Yeah. And Newport actually talks about that. The idea that we've kind of come to value busyness as a badge of honor.
Yes, like a status symbol almost.
Right. Like the more you're running around and doing things, the more productive you must be. Exactly.
Right.
But it's often an illusion.
Right. It's not necessarily about how much you're doing. It's about what you're doing
Yeah.
and the quality of your work.
Yeah. And that's where deep work comes in.
And so in the book, Newport dives into why deep work is actually becoming increasingly rare.
It is. And one of the reasons he talks about is this principle of least resistance.
I remember reading about that. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So basically it means that we tend to gravitate towards the easiest option, even if it's not the most productive one. Right. So if given the choice between something that's going to require a lot of focus and effort and something that's easy and mindless, we're more likely to go for the easy thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just human nature.
Yeah. Makes sense. But it also kind of makes you realize how important it is to be intentional about creating the conditions for deep work.
Yeah. If we don't make a conscious effort to prioritize deep work, it's going to get squeezed out by all the shallow work that's constantly vying for our attention.
Right. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from the book, that deep work isn't something that just happens. It's something you have to cultivate and protect.
Absolutely. It's a skill that needs to be trained, not just a habit to adopt.
So it's not just about saying, okay, I'm going to do deep work now. It's about creating the right environment, the right mindset, and the right habits.
Yeah. It's the whole process.
Right. So it's not easy.
No, it's not.
Mm.
But the rewards are definitely worth it.
And Newport makes a compelling argument for those rewards. He doesn't just say, oh, deep work will make you more productive. He actually talks about how it can be beneficial on multiple levels.
He does. He lays out several different arguments for why deep work is valuable.
Right, like the economic argument, for example.
Yeah. So he talks about how deep work is becoming increasingly valuable in the knowledge economy.
Which makes sense. I mean, the skills that are in high demand today,
Yeah.
things like problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, those all require deep focus.
Exactly. Those are the skills that are going to set people apart in the job market.
Right, especially as automation takes over more and more of the routine tasks.
Exactly. So if you can master deep work, you're going to be in a much better position to thrive in the future.
So deep work is not just about getting more done, it's also about developing the skills that are going to be essential for success in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not just about the economic benefits either.
Right. Newport also talks about the neurological impacts of deep work.
He does, and it's fascinating stuff.
It really is. So what's the science behind that?
Well, when we're in a state of deep focus, our brains release chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine.
Which are the feel-good chemicals.
Exactly. They make us feel more engaged, more motivated, and more fulfilled.
So it's not just about being more productive, it's about actually feeling better when you're doing the work.
Yeah. And it also helps us to enter a flow state,
Right, that feeling of being completely absorbed in a task where time seems to fly by.
Exactly. And that flow state is incredibly rewarding. It boosts our creativity, our productivity, and our overall sense of satisfaction.
So it's like a virtuous cycle. The more you engage in deep work, the better you feel and the more you want to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a powerful feedback loop.
And it makes you think about the downsides of constant distraction, which is something else that Newport talks about.
Yes, he calls it attention residue.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that. It's the idea that even when we think we're multitasking effectively, our brains are actually leaving a bit of attention behind on each task.
Exactly. It's like mental clutter.
Yeah, it's like you're never fully present in any one thing because you're always carrying around these little bits of unfinished business from other tasks.
Yeah. And that can be incredibly draining.
It is. I've definitely felt that like a brain fog after bouncing between too many things at once.
Yeah. And it makes it much harder to engage in deep work.
Right. So not only are we missing out on the benefits of deep work when we're constantly distracted, we're also making it harder for ourselves to focus when we do try to do it.
Exactly. It's like we're training our brains to be distracted.
Which is kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. It's like we're becoming addicted to distraction.
But luckily, Newport doesn't just leave us with a warning about the dangers of distraction. He also offers some solutions, some strategies for cultivating deep work.
He does. And that's what we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
So for now, I think it's worth reflecting on how much deep work we're currently doing in our own lives.
Yeah. And how we might be able to create more space for it.
Exactly. Because it sounds like it's not just about being more productive, it's about living a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
I agree. I think that's one of the most powerful messages of the book.
So until next time, keep diving deep.
And stay focused.
We'll see you then.
See ya. Yeah. It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you kind of reevaluate how you're spending your time and energy.
Definitely.
And I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts. You know, when we left off last time, we were talking about all the benefits of deep work, and you mentioned that you were leaning towards the bimodal philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. I think for me personally, the idea of scheduling those dedicated blocks of time for deep work makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I can see that it kind of gives you that structure without feeling too restrictive.
Right. Exactly. It's about finding a balance that works for you.
Yeah. And I think that's a key takeaway from the book, that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to deep work.
Absolutely. It's about finding what works best for your individual needs and preferences.
So let's dive back into the book and explore some more of Newport's insights. In the last part, we were talking about collaboration and how it can actually enhance deep work. And you highlighted a section that talks about applying business principles to our deep work habits. How does that work?
It's about bringing a sense of strategic execution to our personal productivity.
Yeah,
right. Newport draws on this framework called the 4 disciplines of execution, which is popular in the business world.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
So it's basically a set of principles for achieving goals, and Newport applies it to deep work.
Interesting. So how does that translate to deep work?
Well, the first discipline is to focus on the wildly important.
So it's not just about doing more deep work. It's about being clear about what you're trying to achieve with those focused hours.
Exactly. It's about identifying your most ambitious goals, the ones that will really move the needle.
Okay. So the things that are going to make the biggest impact.
Right. And then aligning your deep work efforts with those priorities.
Makes sense. So it's about being strategic with your time and energy.
Exactly. And the second discipline is to act on the lead measures, which means tracking your progress towards those goals.
So how do you do that with deep work?
Well, it's about focusing on the inputs, not just the outputs. So instead of just looking at the end product, you're measuring your deep work efforts.
So like tracking the hours you spend in deep focus.
Yeah, exactly. That's one way to do it.
Okay. That makes sense. It gives you a tangible way to measure your progress.
Right. And it helps to create accountability.
Yeah, because you're not just relying on willpower, you're actually tracking your efforts.
Exactly. And the remaining 2 disciplines, keeping a compelling scoreboard and creating a cadence of accountability, further reinforce this idea of tracking progress and staying motivated.
So it's like you're bringing that business mindset to your personal productivity.
Yeah, it's about being deliberate and intentional about your deep work practice.
I like that. It makes it feel more manageable, like you're not just trying to wing it.
Right. And it can help to keep you on track when things get tough.
Which they inevitably will, because deep work is challenging.
It is. But it's also incredibly rewarding.
And one of the things that makes it more sustainable is downtime. which is something else that Newport talks about.
Yeah, downtime is crucial for deep work.
And it seems kind of counterintuitive. Like if you're trying to be more productive, why would you take breaks?
Right. But it's actually essential for several reasons.
Okay, like what?
Well, first, it allows your unconscious mind to process information.
So even when you're not actively working on a problem, your brain is still kind of churning away in the background.
Exactly. And that can lead to breakthroughs.
Like you might come back to a problem after taking a break and suddenly have a new insight.
Yeah. It's like your brain has been working on it while you were doing other things.
That's amazing. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah. And downtime also helps to recharge your mental energy.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, deep work is cognitively demanding. It takes a lot of mental effort.
Yeah. And we need to replenish those mental resources. Otherwise, we're going to burn out.
So downtime is like hitting the reset button on your brain.
Exactly. And it also helps us to appreciate our work more.
Okay. How so?
Well, when we're constantly plugged in, we can lose sight of the value and meaning in what we do.
Right. It's like we're just going through the motions.
Exactly. But taking breaks gives us a fresh perspective. It allows us to step back and see the bigger picture.
And to appreciate the progress we're making.
Yeah. And to reconnect with our why.
Right. Why we're doing the work in the first place.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly motivating.
So downtime is not just about resting. It's also about renewing our purpose.
It is. And it's an essential part of a sustainable, deep work practice.
So how do we make the most of our downtime? Are there specific ways to make it more restorative?
Yeah, Newport has some suggestions for that. One of them is to create a shutdown ritual at the end of the workday.
Okay. What's a shutdown ritual?
It's basically a set of actions you perform to signal to your brain that it's time to switch off from work.
So it's like a mental transition from work mode to personal mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can involve things like reviewing any incomplete tasks, making plans for the next day, and mentally closing the door on work until the following morning.
So it's about creating a clear separation between work and personal time.
Yeah. And it helps to prevent burnout.
Makes sense. Because if you're always kind of half working, half relaxing, you're never really fully present in either mode.
Right. And that could be incredibly draining.
So a shutdown ritual helps to create those clear boundaries so you can fully detach from work and recharge.
Exactly. And it also helps to set you up for success the next day.
Because you're going into it with a clear plan and a fresh mind. So what are some other ways to make downtime more restorative?
Well, Newport emphasizes the importance of embracing boredom.
That sounds kind of counterintuitive. I mean, we're so used to filling every moment with stimulation.
I know, but it's actually incredibly beneficial for our brains.
Okay. How so?
Well, when we're constantly bombarded with information and novelty, our brains become addicted to it.
So it's like we're training our brains to be distracted.
Exactly. And that makes it harder to focus.
So boredom is like a mental detox.
Yeah. It's a way to reset our attention spans and strengthen our focus muscles.
So how do we embrace boredom? I mean, it sounds kind of, well, boring.
I know, but it's not about sitting around doing nothing. It's about engaging in activities that allow your mind to wander.
So things like going for a walk without your phone.
Or reading a book.
Or just sitting in a coffee shop and people watching.
Exactly. Anything that allows your mind to decompress and recharge.
So it's about creating space for stillness and reflection.
Exactly. And that's where the magic happens.
Okay, I'm gonna give it a try.
I think you'll be surprised at how restorative it can be.
I hope so. But even with the best intentions, distractions are inevitable, especially in our digital age.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
So how do we manage those distractions and protect our deep work time?
Well, Newport has some suggestions for that too. One of them is to schedule internet use.
So instead of just mindlessly browsing whenever you have a free moment.
Right. You create specific blocks of time for online activities.
Okay. So it's about being intentional with your technology use.
Exactly. And it helps to regain control over your attention.
Because you're not constantly reacting to notifications and emails.
Right. You're deciding when and how you're going to engage with technology.
So it's like taking back your power.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly freeing.
I can imagine. But even with scheduled internet blocks, those distractions can still creep in.
They can. And that's where other strategies come in, like creating a distraction-free work environment.
So like turning off your phone, closing your email, and finding a quiet space to work.
Yeah. And you could also use tools like noise-canceling headphones or website blockers.
Okay, so it's about creating those external barriers to distraction.
Exactly. And it also helps to have a clear plan for what you're going to work on.
So you're not just sitting down and hoping inspiration will strike.
Right. You're going in with a specific goal in mind.
And that helps to keep you focused.
Exactly. Because you know what you're trying to achieve.
So it's a combination of external and internal strategies.
It is. It's about creating the right environment, the right mindset, and the right habits.
And it's a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely. It's a process of continual improvement.
And I think that's a good reminder as we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah. Deep work is not something you master overnight. It's something you cultivate over time.
And the rewards are well worth the effort.
They are. So keep diving deep and stay focused.
We'll be back in the next part to explore even more of Newport's insights and strategies for deep work.
Looking forward to it.
Mastery.
Yeah.
I like that. It's like you become an expert in your craft.
Yeah.
Exactly, through focused effort and dedication.
Okay. But as we wrap up our deep dive into Cal Newport's deep work, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about turning these ideas into action,
Right. It's all well and good to talk about the theory of deep work, but how do we actually do it?
Exactly. We've covered a lot of ground, the definition, the benefits, the different philosophies and strategies.
And even the long-term impact.
Right. So what's the one thing, if our listener could only take away one thing from this exploration, what would you want it to be? Something they can actually apply to their own lives starting today.
I would say the most important takeaway is that deep work is a choice.
Okay. A choice. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's a conscious decision to prioritize depth over shallowness.
So to say no to distractions and yes to focus?
Exactly. And to cultivate the skills and habits that allow us to really focus on the work that matters most.
So it's not about waiting for the perfect environment or the perfect moment.
Yeah.
It's about making a decision to do it.
Yeah. It's about taking control of your time and your attention. And it sounds like it starts with recognizing the value of deep work.
It does. It's not just a productivity hack. It's a way to live a more fulfilling, more creative, and more successful life.
Okay. So once you've made that decision, what's the next step? What's one practical thing our listener can do right now to start cultivating a deeper work life?
I would say identify your most important professional goal.
Okay. Like the one thing you really want to achieve in your career?
Exactly. And once you have that goal in mind, you can start to experiment with the different strategies we talked about.
Right. And see which ones actually help you move closer to that goal.
Yeah. It's about finding what works for you.
And I think that's a good point because it can be easy to get overwhelmed with all the tips and techniques. So maybe starting with something simple is a good idea.
Absolutely. Like incorporating a shutdown ritual at the end of the day.
Yeah. That's something I've been trying to do, and it's definitely helped me to create a clear separation between work and personal time.
Yeah. It's a small change, but it can make a big difference.
Right. And maybe just scheduling 1 hour of deep work per day.
Yeah. That's a great way to start. And then gradually increase it as you get more comfortable.
So it's about building those focus muscles over time.
Exactly. It's like any other skill. The more you practice it, the better you get at it.
And we've talked a lot about the importance of finding a deep work philosophy that aligns with your individual needs and preferences. But what about tools and resources? Are there any specific apps or technologies that you recommend?
There are tons of apps out there that can be helpful for blocking distractions, scheduling focus time, tracking your progress.
But at the end of the day, it really comes down to having a mindful approach to technology.
I think that's the most important thing. It's about being intentional with your tech use and making sure it's serving you, not the other way around.
So instead of being controlled by your devices?
Right. You're in control.
And that starts with things like turning off notifications.
Yeah, that's a simple step, but it can make a huge difference.
Right, because every notification is a little tug on your attention.
And it takes you out of that flow state.
And beyond those external tools, we've also talked about the importance of cultivating certain inner qualities that support deep work.
Yes, those are crucial.
So what are some of those key qualities and how do we develop them?
Well, one of the most important qualities is patience.
Okay, patience.
Yeah.
Why is that so important for deep work?
Because deep work is a skill. And like any skill, it takes time and practice to develop.
Right. It's not something you just magically become good at overnight.
Exactly. So be patient with yourself. Don't get discouraged if you have setbacks. Just keep practicing.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
It is. And another important quality is self-compassion.
Okay. Self-compassion.
Yeah.
How does that relate to deep work?
Well, deep work can be challenging. There are going to be times when you struggle to focus, when you get distracted, when you feel like giving up.
And that's okay.
It is. It's part of the process. So be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Just acknowledge the difficulty and keep moving forward.
So it's about giving yourself grace.
Exactly. And another important quality is curiosity.
Curiosity. Why is that important for deep work?
Because deep work is often about exploring new ideas, solving challenging problems, pushing the boundaries of your knowledge and understanding.
So it requires a willingness to learn and grow.
It does. And it's also much more enjoyable when you're approaching it with a sense of curiosity.
So instead of seeing it as a chore.
Right. You see it as an opportunity for discovery.
And finally, I would say courage.
Courage.
Because deep work often requires us to challenge conventional wisdom, to take risks to pursue our own unique path.
And that can be scary.
It can, but it can also be incredibly rewarding.
It can. So be courageous in your pursuit of deep work and trust that it will lead you to amazing places.
So to sum it up, it sounds like deep work is about making a choice, developing the right skills and habits, and cultivating those inner qualities that support focus, patience, self-compassion, curiosity, courage.
I think that's a great summary.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought? Something that wasn't explicitly mentioned in the book that you'd like to leave our listener with? Something to ponder as they embark on their own deep work journey.
I would say think about deep work as a form of self-care.
Self-care. Okay, that's an interesting perspective.
In a world that's constantly demanding our attention, deep work is a way to reclaim control of our time and energy.
So it's about taking care of your mental and emotional well-being.
Exactly. And it's about investing in your own growth and development.
And when you approach deep work from that perspective, it becomes much more sustainable and enjoyable.
It does. It's no longer a chore. It's a gift you give yourself.
And on that note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close. I hope our listener is feeling inspired and empowered to cultivate a deeper, more focused, and more meaningful work life.
I hope so too. Remember, deep work is a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and keep experimenting until you find a rhythm that works for you.
And remember, a deep life is a good life. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep diving deep.
See you then.